Okay, well, we should start with a prayer first. Heavenly Father, we ask that you would be with us as we consider the world and the creation that you created for us and how we mimic it in our art, that your name may be glorified and our faith may be strengthened. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, this is great. I never heard my voice out here in the sanctuary. Does it always echo like that? It does. Okay. All right. Pastor Reckley has shown me how to work my smartphone, which my kids say, Dad, you don't say smartphone anymore, you just say phone. Is that correct? And somewhere along the line it should work. Okay. What we're going to do is talk about the secrets and the mysteries of the art and the architecture of this church. And the reason for the secrecy is the fact that most of it was lost. People don't remember why this was done. And some of these things are also mysteries to me because I haven't figured out why they were done. Who, for example, came up with the idea for these windows? Why these particular scenes? Nobody bothered to write any of that down. So I have a number of things. I'm not giving out a handout because you will have all of this at your fingertips when my book ever comes out. So then you'll be able to read it there. And as I go along, where you have questions, just raise your hand. I'll stop. So I'm not going to ask for questions. You just raise your hand and I'll stop. What we're going to do first is do a side-by-side comparison of sorts between this 1897 church and the North Side Church, as St. John's was called 100 years ago. We were called the South Side Church by the Missouri and Wisconsin Synod people in Racine, and St. John's was the North Side Church. So we're going to do a side-by-side comparison of the two for this reason. Both were built in 1897. St. John's was dedicated in January of 1897. This church was dedicated on the first Sunday of March. Now you may wonder why that happened. It happened because they were in a race to see who was going to get done first. Both congregations had a friendly rivalry. Both pastors exchanged pulpits often. Both congregations exchanged churches often for mission festivals, where St. John's would have a mission festival and then all of the First Evan people would go over there and cram into that place, but they had more seating. Do you know why? You're from St. John's. They had a balcony. And that balcony, I was just in it a couple of days ago, is humongous. It's a traditional horseshoe balcony where the very center of it comes to about right here in the middle of the church, and then it wraps around the walls. That was standard fare for these Gothic churches that were built in the Victorian age. Up through the turn of the century, the Gothic church with the balcony. But if you have a balcony, what do you have a hard time also putting in that this church had no problem putting in? Windows. And if you go, and I've got some examples of their windows, and when you start looking at them, you will have a deja vu experience, because it's my argument that both congregations used the very same studio. Now, how they were able to do that, I don't know. If you do any work with stained glass, you will figure out real soon that it's very time-consuming. So these studios back in the late 1800s had many, many workers. A lot of them were German. And back in those days, labor was cheap. Pastor Gilbert was telling me that at one point they had over 300 laborers working on St. John's to get it done, and there was a near cyclone that hit the north side, didn't hit the south side. but it hit the north side, which stopped their building, and these 300 laborers were idle as a reason for it, but it didn't set them back so that they were still able to beat out what was called First German at the time. We were not First Evan. First Evan came about in the early 1950s. Just as I digress, you may wonder. My brother Jim, editor of Forward in Christ, asked me, if you do anything, just answer the question, where did First Evan come from? Any guesses, any ideas where it came from? It came from the sports pages in the Racine Journal-Times. They couldn't write out First Evangelical, so they abbreviated it, First Evan. And that's where I figure it came about, because then after that, my dad picked it up and used it in his advertisements. Pastor Volkert had First Eve, period. And my dad had First Evan. But there was no First Evan in 1897. There was First German. And you will have to decide for yourself when you see what St. John's is like. How many people have actually been inside St. John's? Raise your hand, please. Okay. You've been there. And then some of the things that you'll see will trigger memories or feelings, because the two churches are not the same architecturally. They were built in the very same year. They had two different architects. We had the best architect in town, Chandler. Chandler was renowned throughout the state of Wisconsin and the upper Midwest for his school buildings. And there are a number in Racine that you can see, and I'll point them out to you as we go along, where you can see the very signature look of his walls where they sweep out. And there's a school on South 6th Street or West 6th Street. It's now a special school for Unified. Jefferson. Yeah. That was made by him, and it has the same characteristic sweep as our towers. So we had Chandler, they had someone else, and there was a rivalry and there was a little bit of bad blood between both architects. So don't let me forget that, because it's an interesting story about the architect who was employed by St. John's and who was the former architect of the tycoon that you're going to learn about this morning, who was the driving force, I believe, behind everything that you see. Okay? So, what you probably want to ask yourself as we go into this is, why is this church so different inside than St. John's? And it all has to do with tradition, committees, and a single vision. Now, I'll start with some of the artwork in St. John's. Pastor Gilbert pointed this out to me and said, it is probably one of the most hilarious things in his building. And I just thought I'd start out with this to show you that not everything goes right in art. Do you know what that symbol stands for? What do you see in that symbol? You see an S. There's one S. Look at our altar and look in the middle of it, and you'll get the answer. I'll try to hide behind here. What do you see in the middle of our altar? You see three letters. What are they? I-H-S. All right, if you take that and turn it upside down, you get IHS. The studio put it in upside down. And Pastor Gilbert told me he thought that it was done deliberately. Why? Because there was an ancient tradition in church guilds and builders to put something deliberately wrong in a church just because it's a fallen world and only God is perfect. So they would do that, which got me to thinking, what do we have in here? That's wrong. So, you look for it, I'll look for it. Okay, now I gotta put my glasses on because we're gonna go to the next screen. Come on. Okay, here's another picture. And these are the medallions like you see here, the communion cup, the anchor, the Bible. I've never seen this one before. I'm just starting out with some curiosities to whet your appetite. What is that? You see wings? Time.
Helen said time flies.
Time flies. Tempus fugit. Die Zeit vergeht. Time flies. Yeah. It could then be a symbol for eternity. Okay. Now this is looking down at the chancel from the balcony in St. John's. And I'll have to use this. This is what's called the chancel, but it's built as a separate room on the outside of the building. And a lot of Roman Catholic and Lutheran churches are built this way, and that little room looks like a beehive that's been cut in half. And that's stuck on the back of the building, and it's called an apse, A-P-S-E, apse. And that then, on the inside, becomes the chancel. Do you see that here? In a way, yes, you see the chancel. But if you went on the outside of the church, would you see that little beehive building? No. That's because this church was built in a very conventional way. The whole design and strategy of it goes back centuries. I mean centuries. You'll have the same arrangement in cathedrals dating from the year 1000. Same concept. The only difference would be that balcony. The balcony was developed in the early 1800s, late 1700s. You'd have galleries, rather, on the sides, and then up there you could sit or watch, and then you'd have these rows of pillars on the inside obstructing views. The balcony is a later idea, but it's still very conventional. In here, this is one big hall, from that wall to that wall. It's one big hall. But this kind of a building also had its antecedents or earlier examples. In German, it's called a Halle, H-A-L-L-E, a hall. This is a hall church. And the strategy of a hall church is that you just build 4 walls, and then you can arrange the inside any way you want, and you're not restricted by something like an apse. See? So when they built this hall church, they did something really amazing. And that is, there they tucked the chancel in the central niche, and then on the outside, you have 2 other smaller niches. Now ask me, have you ever seen this before? Answer, no. I've been in hundreds of churches. I've seen hundreds of pictures of churches. I have never seen this arrangement before. This is completely unique. And whoever came up with the idea, I've got an idea, and you can buy it or discard it, but this is all one single person's vision. And that's how you can tell the difference in art between a committee job and an individual's perspective. I've dealt with dozens and dozens of committees in my life. It's neither negative nor positive, just a fact. But I know how committees work. And then in the art world, I've worked with over 50 churches, I should say. 50 churches means 50 committees. How does a committee work? Let's have an altar. Well, what kind of an altar should there be? 3 people like this, 2 people like that. So you have 3 versus 2. What happens? You have a compromise. You have a compromise. Oh, that's too extreme. No, that's not extreme enough. And this is how committees work. When I was in high school, our professor, Elmer Kiesling, who was the probably best prof I ever had, was also the head of the building committee for Trinity Lutheran Church in Watertown. And he said to us, boys, when you become pastors and you have committees, make sure they're as small as possible. What did that mean to an 18-year-old? What he was saying was that if you want anything that has little personality, then get as many people involved as you can, because there will be a typical struggle between the extremes. On the other hand, if you want something that shows imagination, daring do, or whatever, then you put Frank Lloyd Wright in charge of it, correct? Well, that's my extreme example. The fewer people involved in a project, the more imaginative and the more of a single vision it becomes. If you don't want that and you want something conventional, then this is what you do. St. John's built a very beautiful, now don't get me wrong, I'm not knocking it in that sense. Aesthetically, it's very beautiful, but it's very unimaginative. It's very conventional. You can go throughout Wisconsin and find this kind of a church which is a mimic of the old world. That was the whole idea. Who built these churches? This one too? People who had accents. When I was in 8th grade next door, every kid in the class had a grandma with an accent. I'm not kidding you. Everyone had a German grandma, it seemed like. And that's just to say that this church, like St. John's, was very much an immigrant church, and they wanted a church like what they had back in Bavaria or in Hesse or whatever. And these people wanted a conventional church. That's what they got. Now,
Pastor, any story on the lighting?
the lighting?
Yeah, it's the same light.
Oh, yeah. How about that?
Oh, okay.
One thing that I'll show you later, one thing that they excelled at in their interior that we don't have, by strategy, was their ceiling. Their ceiling is concave, and it's just gorgeous. Ours, you couldn't do much more than what you have right now, because the strategy here was, we want light, we want windows. And the feeling between both buildings is amazing. When you go into St. John's, it's a darker building, because half of it is underneath a ceiling. It has to be that way. But also, as a result, they don't have the windows we have, because there was not much place or room to put big picture windows like this. Okay. Do you see something here? What church are we in? Notice the motif. Notice what's called, this is Art Nouveau. This is called floral linear or curvy linear. That was the thing about Art Nouveau. It was very curvy, very curvy. And you can see it, the same style and motif. Yes, Katie?
Except for that, the only thing that I've been noticing in their windows and ours is they have the peak and ours is all.
Oh, yes. Thank you for that. I wasn't even going to talk about that. What she's talking about is the arch. As I said, this is a conventional Gothic church. And as a result, you have what's called a lancet arch, which comes to a point. That's called the lancet arch. I dare you to find one here. I'll give you $1 million. There are no Gothic arches in this church anywhere. In fact, if you look at the altar, it's a riot of Romanesque arches, upside down and every which way. It's amazing. Chandler, in the 1897 papers, said that this is a Gothic Romanesque building. Whatever. How do you come up with something like that? Again, I've never seen anything like this before. Thank you very much for that. All of this is Romanesque. Inside of a Gothic building from the outside. It's Gothic from the outside. You walk inside and it's all Romanesque. But here you can see the same kind of design as what you have here. These are their main windows. Once you get out from underneath the balcony, this is what you see. Lancet windows, but you don't see any pictures. What you do see, however, notice here, the Heilige Schrift right there, same artwork. And then here, the Holy Spirit, where do you find it here? Right there. Right there. This is by Heinrich Holman from his illustrated book, and it is a painting that I don't know if he did it exactly for Rockefeller, but Rockefeller, the oil man, bought it and then installed it in Riverside Church in New York City. It hangs there to this day. It instantly became a hit. Everybody wanted it in their church. Where do we have it in this building? Back there, the window nobody looks at. But by the way, who donated that building? You can see it. I can see it right here. I know what it says. Do you know what it says? It says, gestiftet von Krankenkrein, given by the Sick Club. The Sick Club in German. They weren't just sick, but they were smart. This was an insurance society. This was like a predecessor to AAL. AAL was started by sick clubs in Appleton. Started a furor. How dare you put money out and not trust God? It was a big, big deal. Well, the sick clubs went out, and now it's okay to take insurance. I'm not kidding you. This was a big deal back in 1900. That was a daring move. And they got into trouble in this congregation. It's pretty interesting that the picture that they chose for themselves was Jesus praying. And they put it there so that all of their antagonists and opponents in the congregation would have to walk out of church looking at it. Politics in the church? Oh, come on. But that was an amazing painting, and it appears in reverse fashion in St. John's. Why would you do that? They just reversed it.
Is it because it's on the left side of the altar, so he's looking at the altar?
Hey, that's good. I'll have to ask Pastor Gilbert. Do you think that's why?
That's on the left side.
Yeah. But that's the traditional. And by the way, those of you who went through Sunday school like me here years ago, you remember the black and white version of this? There was a black and white monochromatic painting of the Lord, of Jesus in Gethsemane, hanging in the hallway. And I'm wondering, Scott, have you seen it anywhere? Is he here, or did he leave?
It might be in the garage.
It might be in the basement. It is?
Actually, I think it's right up this hallway. Yeah.
Oh. Why don't you if it's here, bring it out and show everybody. We don't know who painted this. I'll just go on. As he's looking for it.
He's got it right here.
In color. Is the one you think?
No, that's not the one.
That's not the one.
No. It's like it's like twice as big as that, and it's an oil painting, and it's done in black and white. It used to be in the Sunday school room, and then it was in the hallway where that mural is that Melanie did, and then it just disappeared. So I don't know if it's in the basement somewhere. We got to find that. We got to look for that. Okay. Now, here's another medallion in St. John's. Right there. Right there. So, is it a poor argument to say that both churches had windows by the same studio? The studio, as far as I can tell, was the John Kinsella studio of Chicago. And the Congregational Church on State Street, which is now St. George Serbian Orthodox, those windows went in a year after this church, and in the newspaper it did say that those windows were from the Kinsella studio in Chicago. You know where that one is? It's in neither our church nor any other Wisconsin church in this area except for one. It's a familiar painting. It's another one of these religious illustrations that came out of a devotional booklet. I don't know who the artist is, but I do know where to find this one in stained glass. Katie. It's a water of life. It's a water of life. And it was donated by, if you look at that window down there, it says Bertha Frank. The window in Epiphany, Water of Life, was donated also by Frank. It's a long story. You'll enjoy reading it someday in my book. Here is a bronze plaque dedicated to 4 members of St. John's who were killed during World War II. We had 2 members who were killed in World War II. We also had a plaque like this right back between those 2 windows with all the names of the servicemen. Very interesting story. I wish Marlene were here because she could tell you about Mrs. Johnson, not Fred's wife or any of that family. It was a different Mrs. Johnson. She had a son who was in uniform. Guess how many young men, were in uniform during World War II from this congregation? 98. 98 young men who were in uniform during World War II. And I believe there are also some women too, so we could say over 100, but I know 98 men. And this Mrs. Johnson wanted to have an American flag somewhere in the church. Who stood in her way? Pastor Volkert. We're not going to have any flags here. Well, she didn't give up. And finally, Volkert, remembering what had happened to his predecessor over flags and everything, you'll read that story too, twice. There was a near riot in Racine because of his position on flags. No flags in the church, no military honors, whatever. Volkert probably remembered what happened, and he told Mrs. Johnson, well, if you want a flag, then you're going to have to go before the voters and petition them. She did. And the voters overwhelmingly approved her idea. And Volkert said, all right, if there's going to be a flag and a memorial in the church, then the Friendship Society is going to have to take care of it. And the Friendship Society had just been organized in about 1943, and they had a big plaque right there where that uplighting is. It was somewhere in there with all the names on it. And then what happened to it? Has anybody ever seen it? It just spurlos versenkt, they said in German. Disappeared without a trace. Why would you do that? In here, you have St. John's with a memorial still there. And how many of you have seen this in other Wisconsin Synod churches where they still have that World War II memorabilia displayed somewhere because they're proud of it? Here, it went up begrudgingly, and after the war, it just disappeared. Somebody got rid of it. So that's what that reminds me of. And they did it in brass, of all things. This is up in the bell tower. This is the marquee for the church from the earliest 1950s. Here's Reverend Armin Schaefer. He was my dad's classmate at Concordia College. They went to school together. And then down here is retired Dr. John Berger. He was the ace theologian of the Synodical Conference in this area. He and Volker got on well. But they saved that. I thought it was interesting, but they stuck it in the bell tower where nobody could see it. Here's where they memorialize all the dead pastors and teachers of the congregation, again in brass. And then here's their new chancel. The old altar they got rid of. When did this happen? Any guesses? 1950s, when so many churches, old churches, went to blonde oak furniture, and then they got rid of the beautiful altar work, and then they put this in. What really peeved Pastor Gilbert was that they not only got rid of all that, but they covered up the 2 windows that you see. They just plastered them up. And then people forgot about it until some old timers said, oh, by the way, you know, behind the plaster there are 2 windows. Yeah, come on. Well, yeah, they discovered them, and now they opened them up, and
You could still see them from the outside,
yeah.
on the back.
No, you can't. He told me that you can't because they put an annex there that connected the school. Oh, when you were, that's so long ago, Tim.
The other thing that's interesting is that altar is, it was around 1960, it was just blonde. When they redid the church, they stripped and restained.
And restained
all
it.
that woodwork.
Yeah. It was a rage after World War II. Blonde oak. They would steam it. They called it liming it. Yeah. And here's the fantastic ceiling of St. John's. All of this is concave, and then it's painted. They spent more money than this church on their balcony, and then on the exterior of the church. Wait to see the exterior. They had their values, but they were creating a conventional church, which would cost a lot of money. They spent about $2,000 more than First German. First German spent a total of $18,000 on this entire building, including contents, and St. John's about $20,000. My argument is they spent more because of this balcony. And we were going to have a balcony here too. Those windows that you see in the back there, those are the doors of what would have been a horseshoe balcony right there. You would have gone up the stairs in both towers up into that balcony. Why didn't they do it? Thank God they didn't do it, because we wouldn't have these windows, for number one. Number two, we would have had constant trouble. Constant trouble. From what? From kids and other people making noise up in the balcony. They had constant battles with young people and kids in the first church with the balcony. They finally had to make a rule: no unmarried person shall sit in the balcony. They had to hire a special policeman from the Second Ward School. He was a member of the church called Christian Raps. What a name for a policeman, Rap. And his job was to keep order in the balcony. And he lived to about 1905. I'm sure he was delighted when he walked into this building and didn't see a balcony. But he was a special policeman. You'll read about him in my book. He was a lot like Scott Pierce. He was the jack of all trades, did everything in the church, and he then was hired to keep order in the balcony. So that's what St. John's has, but we don't have. And like I say, the lip of this comes out right about to the middle of the church, and therefore when you walk in, it's a darker interior than this church. This is incredibly bright when you come into this church. Here are more of the symbols. And this is the inside of their bell tower. I just thought you might be interested in the brickwork. It's amazing to go in there and see the brickwork that holds the thing up. And that's why I say they spent a lot of money that we did not do on their exterior. Here is their attic. And I thought this was really interesting because they got a great catwalk. And we discovered something here that will be of interest to many of you. That's where they put their air conditioning unit. Up where you couldn't see it, and then all the pipes coming down. And that would be something, I think, to investigate, how St. John's got their big interior air conditioned, and they have it tucked away upstairs in their attic. Okay, this is their original altar. Does that look familiar?
I remember.
You remember that. You remember that. Now notice here where the baptismal font went. Right in the middle, which is now in vogue in a lot of Lutheran churches, to put it up there. We have ours here, but when there is a baptism, then it's wheeled over into the center. This is what it looked like after 1936, because in 1936, the Schaldeckel, that sounding board up there, they removed it and they put it in the bell tower to rot, and then somebody found it and they refurbished it, and now it hangs right in the foyer when you come into the church. It's sitting right up there. Very impressive. That's St. John's on the exterior. It is beautiful. It looks a little bit like the Ulmer Minster, the cathedral in Ulm, Germany. Very similar. And they've got a lot of turrets and a lot of little rooms. This room here, Pastor Gilbert says he takes the kids up in these rickety ladders, and he says, "This is where I write my sermons." And they believed him. It's all dusty, and I'm sure pigeons at one time were in there too. It sure looked like it. But this is very conventional, very traditional, very expensive. Now, who is that? This is my wife's great-great-grandfather. Why is he here? Because he was on the church council, and the church council built St. John's. So her great-great-grandfather, that's where her family comes from, St. John's, by way of Grace Chapel and now First Event. But that's their great-great-grandfather, and befitting the name Felgenhauer, which means wheelwright in German, he was a carriage maker. This is also my wife's great-great-grandfather. Remember, everybody has 8 of those when you get back far enough. This is A.O. Gertenbach, who was the principal at St. John's. And he was one of those who was instrumental in the building of the church. And last but not least, this is also Patty's great-great-grandfather, Pastor Christian Keller, who was the big wheel of St. John's at the time, and who died a spectacular death on Christmas Eve and was front page news the next day. So when I married Patty, I didn't realize I was marrying into such an illustrious family. That all came out later on about, oh, really? Man, and not to say anything bad about how the congregations keep their cemetery plots, but St. John's does a wonderful job of, they have a cemetery plot which is right outside our window, and I can see his grave. And they do a wonderful job. They put flowers and everything on it. So anyways, any questions up to this point? Now we're going to go over to First Event. Yeah.
Did you say who won the race of completion?
Oh, St. John's won by 2 months. By 2 months. Yeah, it's hard to understand how that could have happened, but both congregations were growing by leaps and bounds at the time. There were waves of German immigrants coming in the 1880s. It's what's called the second wave. And that's where a lot of my relatives came from. Pomerania, that was a province of Prussia, and they were getting forced out because of the draft. A lot of the, there's nothing new under the sun. A lot of the German immigrants from Prussia were coming to escape the draft. They didn't go to Canada, they came to Wisconsin. And the churches were growing fast, and our church had talked about a new church since 1874. And let's go to that one. There were 3 building committees in the history of the church to build this church. There was one in 1874, and the building committee was made up of all of the big merchants, and they couldn't agree on anything, so nothing got done. That one was disbanded. Then they had a second building committee. Nothing happened there. Then the third one was put together, and you'll see that things went real fast when this happened. But I wanted to show you this picture because this is the only picture that we have that shows the new church of 1897 with the old church of 1850. That's the original church. And it's kind of odd and ironic in a way, but if you were to take this one and put it here, it's got a close similarity in style to the parish hall that we're proposing. Things come around. This was Mr. Welsh's house. He was a Presbyterian. And remember, there was a Presbyterian church across the street, and right next to the old church was the Welsh parsonage, which later became our teacherage. Notice this church, it's not as ornate. It's more of a big hall, but we had a lot of wonderful pinnacles that were taken off around 1960 because they just rusted out, and the church then was not all that interested in preservation. Like the picture before of St. John's, this one is taken through the trees. There was something about taking pictures of buildings with trees in front of them that was just the style of the time. But this had a wonderful grand approach, these stairs. They were wood, and because they were wood, they also had slots that ran for the rainwater. This became a problem in the 50s and the 60s for women. Their heels would get stuck and break off. I remember a constant problem with women with their shoes breaking off in the slots. Well, then that was all covered up, but it was a magnificent approach. This is the pastor who guided the project. That's Pastor Yeager, by the way.
Pastor, can you go back to, one more, was that actually a balcony above the entryway?
Here?
Yes.
It was, but there was no access to it.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's the way it looked. Very, very ornate. I got a closer picture of that one. This is Pastor Yeager. And then this is the close-up of what the church looked like. And this is a class of like around 1903, 1904. You notice how dirty the bricks are becoming already? It's because of the coal smoke that was in this area. The Cream City brick is very absorbent, porous, and they got dirty real fast. But here you have Pastor Yeager wearing a cross and a clerical collar, and then over there looking mightily strict and stern is Paul Daninger, the congregation's first teacher principal. He came to the congregation in 1893 and was the first principal as we know it now, a teacher. All the principals before were the pastors. They were pastor principals. He was the first one. He set the tone. He came here in 1893. He was 18 years old. That's the way they did things back then. He graduated from Northwestern Prep. His father and Pastor Yeager knew each other from school. They obviously made a deal. He comes to First Eve as an 18-year-old. He became one of the premier organists in the synod. He was famous throughout the synod for playing the organ. And he would do a lot of work in summers going to Chicago and learning under some master there. Here you can see the covered hallways. When we were kids, we loved playing hide and go seek under there. It's really cool. And that door was the main door, the one right there. That was the main door. Any questions? This is the church, the interior around 1950. In 1949, the pulpit was moved from the center. This is where the pulpit was originally, right here, right in front of the altar. That's one of the mysteries, the secrets, why they would have done that. Because that would have been perfect strategy in a Presbyterian or a Baptist church, but not in a Lutheran church. Because then you're obscuring the altar. But that's where it sat for 50 years until 1949, and they moved it right here. And then they put in that door. But what do you see that's different in 1950 from this? The crosses. There were 3 crosses, and then what looks like, I don't know, caskets up there, for want of a better term. Those 3 caskets were put in at the same time because here they're flat. That looks a whole lot better, I think, than this. Whoever did that, I think, had good taste. But then the crosses were removed, and then this signature cross that I have never seen in any other Lutheran church, it appears here. That's a French cross. It's a cross called the Alice Pate, which is the cross within a circle, which means Jesus holds the world in his hand, or Jesus is the Savior of the whole world. It's a great symbolism. Okay, this is somebody's funeral. This picture came from the Curcio family. I don't know whose funeral it was, but it's around 1950, right before my father came, and I believe that's the last picture. Now, all of this says this church is really unique, even though it was built at a time when most churches were very conventional and Gothic. But this one is different. It is very different. A lot of us who grew up here just accept it the way it was and don't see a lot of special attributes about it. But going through the historical records in the newspapers, not in our church council or congregational minutes, the secretaries just did not take a lot of details. For example, the reason we know that the altar, the lectern, the font, and the pulpit all came from the same studio is because Professor August Pieper wrote about this church in what was then the Northwestern Lutheran. In German, it was called the Gemeindeblatt, parish pages. And he wrote there about this magnificent altar and everything, and it was constructed by the Semen Wangeren studio, which was only 1 year old. And they went to this new furniture, church, ecclesiastical studio in Milwaukee and bought it. That took some courage to do that. Then the Semen Wangeren studio also became the Wangeren Weikart organ builders. It's confusing. And that was a young company, and that's where they got the organ from. And this was in 1897. The organ wasn't ready because the money here was basically spent putting up the building. The building itself was about $13,000. And it was a financial stroke of genius to do what they did. They said everybody in the church is going to pool their money to build the building and get the structure up. Once it's up, then we're going to have individuals donate money for this and for that and so forth. That window right there cost $500. And in there it says, Gestiftet von W.J. Ebing, given by William Ebing, except he was dead, so that's how the family put it. William Ebing was one of America's greatest young jugglers and magicians, a member of the congregation, and he died in Houston, Texas. They shipped his body back, they had a funeral for him, and then his will specified that some money be given to the church, and they got $500. And that's how they built all of the things that you see and that are in here. All of the furnishings, put it that way, are individual gifts by the people. So what they did was, everybody is going to pool their money together, and then we're going to give everybody a chance to buy this or that. It was perfect strategy, because people love giving toward things, which always upset my dad so much. He said, oh, there's always money for this and for that, but when it comes to the electric bill, then everybody's poor, nothing in our pockets. And that's human nature. But they used human nature in this way, and that's how they had no trouble getting all of this stuff. Now, there was a hand.
What would be the replacement cost?
The replacement cost for that would probably be about, I would say, $250,000 to $250,000 for something like that, just offhand. Because of all of the technical, I mean, if you go there and you count how many, I did that once during somebody's sermon. I can't remember who it was, but I remember I was just intrigued. Well, you're sitting back there, and there's so much to look at. Professor Johnny's, he was a member of the congregation years ago. His daughter greeted me at the doors, and she says, oh, Pastor Pope, I just love coming here. There's so much to do during the sermon. I was counting all of the gems, and then the amen came, and I couldn't finish it. But I think there was like close to 100 of those. See those gems there? How the light catches them? Those things alone are like $20, $30, $40 alone if you buy them new. Those are antiques. And then not just that, but there are some that are faceted. They look like diamonds. So you put all of that together. And then the work of painting. It's, yeah, I would say $250,000 probably. I don't know what the insurance replacement value is. That would be a good thing to check out. Yeah.
A couple things. The first thing is that when we had our windows restored, I always thought that picture turned out so much better than this one. It's kind of like they didn't fill in the.
They didn't fill in. No. No.
And that just bothers me because I'm like, you pay all that money.
Do you have some money to help us repair that one?
Pardon me?
Do you have some money to help?
I just thought that would have been included.
I would have thought so too. You're prodding me on to the last 5 minutes, and boy, I talked too much about the other stuff. That window is something that you see throughout Wisconsin, in Missouri Synod churches. That is done by Plockman. Plockman was an illustrator of German meditation books. That one is everywhere. This one is our mystery window. I don't know who did it, but I do know it was a beloved scene that appears in Presbyterian churches, United Church of Christ. I had never seen it before in another congregation, and then we were in Mount Dora, Florida. Anybody been there? Mount Dora, it's north of Orlando. Walk into a United Church of Christ because they had an open house. Walking around, all of a sudden, bingo, there it is, only in miniature, this size. So then I got to checking Google, and I found it here, there, everywhere, and it was popular up until about 1905. So it's another 19th century illustration. It could be a German, I don't know, but Plockman was the #1 German artist, and his pictures are everywhere. Then there's Heinrich Hollmann. He was good too, but that one is still our mystery. I don't know who the original artist was. Any questions on that? Let me see. Oh, the organ is unusual. Why it's there, I don't know. Where would you normally find an organ in a big church? Back there in the balcony. Where would you find the piano? Back there. Where would you find the organ loft? The choir loft? Back there. All the sound and the singing from the professionals and the specialists would come from the back of the church. Here it was all done in the front. Why? Don't know. All right. What else? Oh. Why is the church pitched? And why do we have individual seating? That was so far ahead of itself, the papers made note of that. They liked the idea of having privacy. Everybody had their own chair. And we like it to this day, don't we? That's one of the signature looks of a First Event. We have a pew-like look, but still it's individual chairs. It's a great, compromise? Let's see. And the floor pitch. That was done because of the theater type seating that was prevalent, of course, in the day, and then they incorporated it here. A lot of the features of this only now have become popular, in vogue with churches now, like the fan-like seating. This was fan-like seating with a pitched. Scott, how much is the pitch? Is it like 30 inches or so? Yeah? Yeah. So that you have a better view of the place. Okay, is that where I'm supposed to end? Pastor Eckley? One question, okay.
When was the statue repainted?
Oh, the statue. I forgot all about the statue.
Well, I haven't.
The statue was always white. Most of the statues that you see of this throughout the Synod, throughout the Missouri Synod, are always painted. Ours is white. This in Latin is called Christus Consolator, Christ the Consoler. And those of you of Danish background should be happy to know that this is done by the Danish sculptor Thorvaldsen. The original is in Copenhagen, and it's 12 feet high, and it's white. How it came here in 1897, no one knows. It only became popular the year before in a textbook in which it was called the most perfect statue of Christ in the world. Then later on in 1896, it appeared in life-size form in Johns Hopkins Hospital. And then here on Villa Street. Someone was on the ball. Someone knew a lot about art. Someone knew a lot about finances. And you can read all about it when my book comes out, that I feel that the mastermind behind all of this was the church president for 16 consecutive years, August C. Frank. When he died, he left an estate of, in our money, $8.2 million. And he was a tycoon, he was a financier. He owned Island Park and sold it to the city. He did everything. But he also, the mummy downtown in the museum, there's the mummy. We used to go there as kids and look at the mummy all the time. He bought that in Egypt and sent it back to Racine. Either he did or his brother-in-law, Horlick. He was in the upper echelon of Racine society. He was Mr. Everything, and he was our church council chairman and president and head of the building committee. That is how I think this all looks like the vision of one man. It was very daring, very cutting edge, Art Nouveau, a statue that nobody knew about a year before it appeared there in the niche. And the altar was built with that niche for that statue in mind. So somebody.
Was it colored always white?
The colors were always white.
They were always white?
Always white, because the statue in Copenhagen is in Carrara marble, white.
But the gold was added in trim, right?
I did that. But I was only doing what other painters and decorators did. There's always been a gold stripe there. It's always been white. Das Ende. That's it. And my book is going to probably come out hopefully sometime in December, if not December, January. We'll see.